Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo, and today we're going to be talking about the Black Christmas 2006. So yeah, I already talked about the original, okay, the classic. The call is coming from inside the house, you know, and that movie is definitely a classic and icon. To be fair, this movie is, I want to say, the byproduct of the early 2000s horror film genre, which is really not great. And I don't quite know what it is. We're in 2025, and for the last couple of years, we've had a really good kind of like second golden age of horror. But for some reason, 20 years ago, certain things just were like being done to be done, I think. And like, I don't know if there was like, they were just rushing to get movies made for whatever particular reason. Maybe these movies made money, they were cheap. And this movie's definitely cheap, $9 million budget, pulled in $21 million worldwide. Never mind what it might have made on home video, which I don't know. But it's, movies like this that were meant to just kind of come out and be done. And then, they were put out by the studios and, as a quick cash grab. And like this came out in 2006. There was one that came out in 2005 called The Boogeyman by Sony. That's a whole other movie. There was another movie called The Tooth Fairy that came out, I want to say, right around the same time. And again, it's just like, what the hell? And this movie itself, I gotta just point out, is so wildly offensive to storytelling that I don't even understand how this thing got greenlit for what they did. But then again, this is also produced by James Wan, after Saw, and that had blown up. So he definitely was like, James Wan is a great producer, but this is not one of his better films. So if you're not too familiar with this version of Black Christmas, this is the one that is so bitterly cynical that it does make it hard to watch. The 2019 movie is difficult to watch for different reasons. This movie is just like, oof, oh boy, okay. This one takes place several days before Christmas, so not actually on Christmas. And the same thing even goes for the 2019 movie too. And it tells the story of a group of sorority sisters who are stalked and murdered in their house during a winter storm. So unlike the original and the 2019 movie, this takes place in a single night. Now, think about that for a hot moment. Everything in this movie happens in a single night with apparently like no real coordination. And I don't even know. So look, this movie is written and directed by Glen Morgan, who got the gig because he had written and directed the 2003 movie Willard, the remake of Willard, that starred Crispin Glover. But he also wrote the Final Destination. He wrote The One. He wrote, and like I said, directed, Willard. He was a second unit director on Final Destination 3, and he wrote that. And then he wrote and directed Black Christmas. So he had kind of done a lot of stuff in order to kind of get to that point. And then yet, since then, not too much. He did work on The X-Files as a director and writer and a co-executive producer. And then he also was a writer and executive producer on the show Millennium. So he's got TV experience. And I would make the argument that the TV experience, being the executive producer on there, has, I think, a lot to do with the way this movie is formatted. This movie kind of feels like a TV film with how fast-paced it is and how much it's trying to cram into it and how much it's very much, trying to, get done in the short amount of time. So after Black Christmas came out, he worked on, He worked on NBC's Bionic Woman, but he left the show due to creative differences. He was then hired as the writer and executive producer of a show called Intruders on BBC America. And now, at least the last thing we know, is that he was executive producer for the Twilight Zone reboot, headed up by Jordan Peele. And okay, it's like, maybe, I don't know, like, you fail upwards in Hollywood, I guess. This movie should have been, I think, in many ways, a career-ending movie for the people in charge. And I say that because of like the way that it's done. You know, I know it's kind of crazy to talk about that a little bit here. So look, let's talk about the writing of this movie. I'm looking at the Wikipedia to kind of pull from that a little bit. So after writing Willard, which was a remake of an earlier 1971 film that also failed to perform well at the box office, Morgan was approached by Dimension Films to write and direct a remake of Black Christmas. Morgan was a fan of the original and cited it as the predecessor to the modern slasher film, which influenced his decision to commit to the remake. I mean, that is true. It is. It is largely regarded as the original slasher film with something to say that this movie simply didn't. And so when he was conceiving a new script, he had intended to rework elements of the original that were left ambiguous or implied, such as the cryptic phone calls coming from within the house and the lack of any identity as to who Billy is, who he is, what his story is, his origin. And so, Glenn here decided that he really wanted to take it. He really wanted to run with it in a way that might make Oedipus blush, to be fair. So while he was writing the original screenplay, he received input from the film's original director, Bob Clark, who had signed on as an executive producer for the remake. And this, I don't think he had anything to do with it, to be honest with you. However, Clark gave Morgan his blessing, stating in an interview that the remake was still Black Christmas, but explored new subplots that had not been fleshed out in the 1974 film. Didn't necessarily need to do that. And what's interesting is that Bob Clark actually died a few months after this movie came out. And one of the things we have to kind of understand about Bob Clark here is that this guy was not like an unknown. If you don't know the movies that he has done, I'm just going to give you a couple. Okay. He did Porky's 2, A Christmas Story, Loose Cannons, by the way, rip Gene Hackman, who just recently passed away. But then he also did 1999's Baby Geniuses, and then 2004's Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2. And then apparently he directed the movie Blonde and Blonder, starring Pamela Anderson and Denise Richards, that came out in 2008. So, look, this guy has done a ton of stuff. He is responsible for one of the greatest comedies of all time, Porky's. He's responsible for one of the best Christmas movies of all time, A Christmas Story. And he also did Black Christmas, the modern slasher movie. So this guy has a pedigree, right? This homie's got a pedigree. So it's not to say that he's giving his blessing on this. I mean, how much did he really care? That's my question. How much did they pay him in order to be the exec producer on this one, right? Like, he hadn't made anything, really, like, in a while. He had Super Babies had come out and kind of crashed and burned. And then that Blonde and Blonder, they had already filmed, but that didn't come out until 2008. Right. So, he wasn't really doing much at the time and probably just, took the money, to be fair. Right. So there's that. Now, here's where things get, oh my God. Okay. Here's where things go into a realm of X-Files, Twilight Zone. Right. And again, looking at, like, if I had to guess, Glen Morgan saw the incest Civil War family plotline from that one episode of X-Files that was banned, and then thought, hey, that's a good idea. Let's kind of modify that for this movie, because the extensive subplot because again, you've got all these girls in a sorority house and they all start dying one by one. That's half the movie. The other half of the movie, to fill the time, was filling out this subplot with Billy, And so Billy, in this particular case, is inspired by Edmund Kemper, who is a real-life serial killer and also was heavily featured in the first season of Mindhunter in an excellent performance by that actor. And this guy had been locked in a basement of his home by his mother, with whom he later murdered. So they're trying to make Billy somewhat sympathetic, albeit while wildly psychotic. So Billy's character, of whom we know nothing about from the original film, is now sitting there, and he is born. He's sitting in a mental institution after he killed his mother and killed his stepfather, I'm assuming. And, every Christmas, it's always a trigger for him. And so, but they tell the backstory to this other Santa Claus that goes in there. And you find out that Billy was born with severe jaundice. So he is basically yellow. He's basically yellow, right? His mother hates him. His father loves him, but his mother despises him. And ultimately, she ends up killing the father with the help of her boyfriend, who they then end up burying the body underneath the front porch of the house, which Billy then sees because he's in the crawl space. She locks him in the attic. And then one night, while she's drunk and trying to screw her boyfriend and probably trying to get pregnant, he ends up passing out, gets whiskey dick, right? Can't get it up, can't perform. So she is frustrated and she's drunk and she's horny, and she looks up and she sees the latch to the attic, and she goes up there, and Billy is like chained to the chair or whatever the hell it is. And she drops her dress, and we just see it from like her ankles and the dress drop. And she rapes her son. And that produces a child, right? A child. What the hell? And that child ends up being like, just Agnes is the name of the child. And she's kind of normal. All right. But Billy gets angry. He gets upset. So he attacks her and he pulls out an eye, and then kills the mom and kills the dad, and then gets caught and whatever else. Right. And he goes into the mental institution, and then Agnes ends up in the foster care system. And the whole thing was just offensively bad, right? Like, I can understand in my writer brain, I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand it. I get what he's trying to do with this. I get it. I got to understand it. All right, let's go. Like, I get it. But then the other part of me is like, I don't know there, Chief. Something about this seems a little bit off, right? Like, this is 2006 is when this came out. So this would have been written like 2004, 2005. Game of Thrones wasn't a thing yet. Incest on Pornhub wasn't all the rage. So maybe Glen Morgan was ahead of his time on this one. I don't know. But that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to introduce Agnes as a secondary killer and have them have a family reunion. That was the idea. Right? And then apparently the juxtaposition from that was they wanted there to be the relationship between Billy and Agnes, which then allowed Morgan to explore the themes of family, which is also prevalent in the relationships between the female characters. There is no exploration of family between Billy and Agnes. Okay, Billy's trying to get out of the house or get out of the mental institution to get back to the house. So we think that he's already out killing people. But in the very opening scene of the movie, you see that it's a person with blonde hair that kills the first girl. And that's Agnes, as we learn later on. And there's nothing there like, and it was a male actor playing a female. I thought that was really, really interesting. I don't know. I don't know. The whole thing is crazy. So they shot the movie in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so after they shot the movie in Vancouver, BC, they ended up getting into a bit of a conflict with none other than Harvey Weinstein, who was the executive producer over at Dimension Films, specifically over the story's tone and the way that it should end. Because the ending is terrible. But apparently Morgan's original script ended with Kelly and Lee in the hospital receiving a phone call from Billy, whom they believed to be dead. Okay, and that scene was kind of cool, but I'll get to that. And this is something that Morgan filmed, and he wanted to pay homage to the conclusion of the original movie, which had that very kind of like weird, ominous ending. However, that idea was scrapped by Bob Weinstein, who requested that Morgan write and shoot a different ending. And that's what happened in the hospital. And again, I'll talk about that and like what the ever loving crap. So apparently, also, they had various cuts of the movie were made during post production. There's at least 2 different cuts of the film, one that was released in Europe and the one that was released in North America, which are apparently slightly different. And the European cut, which is roughly about 4 minutes shorter than the one we got here. And I don't know. I think that movie being shorter is probably for the best. But then they did like the cardinal sin, I think, of marketing a movie in Hollywood is once the movie had wrapped production in Vancouver, Barb and Harvey oversaw the shooting of additional footage in LA for promotional materials. So he was contacted by the Weinsteins, this being Glen Morgan, who wanted him to pick up some shots for TV, which he agreed. And so some of the stuff that he shot was the shot of Lacey Chabert being dragged through the snow, footage of a woman falling from the roof where there's a weird lawnmower electric light thing, an unidentified woman discovering a woman floating beneath a frozen lake, Michelle Trachtenberg aiming a shotgun and saying "Merry Christmas, motherfucker" into the camera, and additional shots of Trachtenberg in a hallway holding a shotgun while Billy levitates above her on the ceiling. This footage, which was never incorporated into the film, did appear in the official trailer as well as TV spots. So if you're ever wondering, like, when you go see a movie, you know, when you go see a movie and you're like, yeah, man, like what I was looking forward to that trailer, to that scene being in the trailer or being in the movie because I saw it on the trailer and then it's not there, you feel kind of robbed. In this particular case, they legitimately just made up fake shit to get you in the door. And you know what? Whatever, man. Like, that's so bad. The movie itself, again, had like a $9 million budget. And it only did $21.5 million worldwide. And $3.3 million of that was in its opening weekend, which was December 22nd through the 25th. So they opened it basically at Christmas, on Christmas weekend. And it did not do well. It actually got a pretty bad Rotten Tomato score. It's only sitting at 14%. One person calls it a gratuitous remake of the 1974 slasher, pumps out the gore and blood with zero creativity, humor, or visual flair. I mean, that is true. A lot of the deaths kind of happened off screen, right? Like, except for Michelle Trachtenberg, may she rest in peace, by the way. She died kind of on screen, but a lot of other people, like Mary Elizabeth Winstead, dies off screen. Andrea Martin dies on screen. But a lot of people just kind of die off camera. You know, like when Billy kills the Santa Claus in the mental institution, like you just see like all this blood hit the floor and then Billy's walking away in a perfectly pristine, maybe a somewhat pristine Santa Claus suit. But then again, if the Santa Claus suit is covered in blood, then no one's going to see it because it's red, right? Anyway, the movie is a mess. So let's talk about it. So like I said, Billy Lenz, born with severe jaundice, is abused by his mother, Constance. And then ultimately, her and her lover kill Billy's father on Christmas Eve and bury his body in the crawl space underneath the porch. So then from there, he ends up, again, killing his family, popping out the eye of Agnes, and going into a mental institution. So now it's 15 years later, and the house has been turned into a sorority house, the Delta Alpha Kappa at Clement University in New Hampshire. And, it starts off with a girl named Claire, and she is writing a letter to her sister, as well as doing all the gifts for all the other girls in the house, family. And then she gets killed, right? And then you hear, there's another girl named Megan who hears noises. She goes up to the attic. She finds Claire's corpse in the rocking chair with the bag on her head, which is definitely a throwback to the original, which was cool. And then, of course, she gets attacked and killed. And at this point, the other girls are in the living room, and they're all kind of talking about like their holiday plans, and some of them are getting ready to leave, and some of them are just kind of bitchy, and it was just, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? Like, it's so what the hell, right? Like, it is the movie. there's no real plot to the film, right? The girls just start kind of going out one by one by one by one. And they try to throw you a loop for the movie. They tried to, like, you've got Kelly's boyfriend, Kyle, played by, what's his name? I think it's Oliver Hudson, right? And so, like, he had dated that Megan girl before. And he had apparently, like, sent her a video of the two of them having sex, and he filmed it. Maybe she didn't know about it. And so at that point, we're kind of led to believe that Kyle is the killer because, like, Megan was going to say something about the sex tape, and she was going to say it to Kelly, who is dating him at the time. So he didn't want to lose his relationship. So it's like you've got the Billy angle, which we're cutting back to, okay, and then you've got the story at the house where he shows up like halfway through. And so you're like, is he good? Is he bad? Is he good? Is he bad? And then you're like, well, no, he's probably good, but he is still a piece of shit. And then he gets drugged into the attic and killed, by Agnes. Now we learn it's Agnes, right? Billy enters the attic. Now you just basically got the two girls left. And you've got Kelly, and then you've got Lee, who is actually Claire's half-sister. And this might be the juxtaposition he's going for, the exploring the themes of family, right? Where you've got Billy and his sister daughter, Agnes. And then you've got Claire and her half-sister or much older sister, who's half-sister, who is, trying to, like, connect with her a little bit, right? And ends up kind of finding that sisterhood because she was a member of the sorority back when she went to school there. It's a whole mess of a thing. It's an absolute whole mess of a thing, right? But I will say, though, it's like the cool thing about this movie is the climax in the house. I will admit that was pretty cool. Because they get into, like, the space in between the walls, right? And, like, Kelly's trying to climb out, and then you've got, like, Agnes trying to grab her from, like, inside, and then you've got Billy climbing up from the bottom. And the way that it's shot was actually kind of, like, felt kind of Aliens-like, like when they're in, like, they're in the ducts and whatever, and you just kind of see them coming from the darkness. It just looked really freaky. Like, it was actually legitimately a good scene. But then the space in the walls kind of begins to collapse. And the house, like, lights on fire, and Billy and Agnes supposedly burned to death. Okay, then the cops finally show up. They find all the bodies of all the girls, like, all of them. And then they take the girls to the hospital to get Kelly checked out because she's injured. And then it cuts to the morgue, and they bring in the bodies of Billy and Agnes, who are not burned or maimed or even dead. And Billy gets out, kills the coroner, lets out Agnes. They climb into the crawl space. They go into the room where Lee is at. They kill Lee. But then Kelly comes back, and they get into a fight with Kelly. Kelly uses a defibrillator to kill Agnes. And then Billy comes at her, and she basically pushes him off the railing, and he falls on the top of a Christmas tree and, like, gets impaled through his gut and, like, slides, like, halfway down. And that's the movie. And it's kind of like, it is pretty damn cynical, right? Like, it is pretty cynical. Like, the characters aren't likable. There are really no, like, genuine themes of sisterhood here. Dude, the 2019 movie had more themes of sisterhood, regardless of how over the top that was. And it was just like, even like the gore was, half of it was off screen, but at least they committed to the R rating. So there's that. That's a good thing. They committed to the R rating. We can be happy about that. But as I'm sitting there watching this movie, and I'm just going, like, I found it on Tubi, and I'm just going, like, oh my God, like, what am I watching? And it's just, it had this early 2000s vibe that just, to me, really failed to capture a lot of what kind of made, what makes horror movies great. And it was a lot going on back then. You had, like, the Japanese influence, all these American companies trying to, like, recreate Japanese films. Again, like, this recreation. It sucks that Bob Clark signed off on this, and it sucks that he died not long after it came out. And it sucks that he couldn't have been the one to make it himself, considering that we know this dude can make good movies. But like I said, man, the director on this one, Glen Morgan, he has not made a feature film since. And I can't say that we are, that we're all kind of worse, that any of us are worse off as a result. But that being said, This movie is a lean 90 minutes. It flows. Not necessarily in a good way. It's very fast paced. And that might be why, it is what it is, because they set up so many characters that they have to kill off in the span of one night, while also establishing a solid backstory for the killer, the MacGuffin for the audience with the whole Kyle and sex tape thing, and then bringing in Agnes and then having that established. It's too much. It is just straight up too much. But it exists, and you can watch it right now on Tubi. And I am curious to know your thoughts and your opinions on it. Am I wrong? Am I just looking at this through an entirely bad angle? Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. If you guys want to support this show, that'd be great. Please share it. Tell your friends. If you want to leave a review wherever you get your podcast, that'd be fantastic. Or find me on YouTube at Podio Commentary. YouTube.com Podio Commentary. Thank you guys very much for listening to this episode.